Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. FPL Vincenzo here, and today's pod is going to look at team structure. Obviously, one of the big conundrums at the moment is whether we start with Haaland, whether we start with Salah, whether we start with both, or whether we start with neither. And I think there's a growing trend in the FPL community at the moment towards going with neither. Man City having no pre-season, Salah not doing very much in Liverpool's pre-season friendlies, etc., giving people a little bit of cold feet. So I thought I'd have a little look today in terms of what I'm thinking at the moment. Don't take any notice so much of the players in the squads because they're kind of dummy draft, should we say, just to talk about price points, etc. But yeah, just some how I'm approaching the game at the moment and how I'm trying to narrow down my choice. Because I do think at the moment this season is the toughest I think that I can remember, and I've been playing the game for nearly 20 years. But the toughest I remember for settling on a team structure. Like last year, for example, I didn't start with Haaland when he was 15 million. I started with Salah. But it was fairly clear to me, at least from the start, that's how I wanted to go about things, because I couldn't set a team up in a way I wanted with Haaland in. Was he going to get enough points to justify 15 million? I made quite clear choices quite early in that sense. This year, when I'm trying to analyse everything from all different perspectives, and I try and do that, take it from different angles and different stances, I'm finding it much harder to prioritise on one thing and focus on one thing and make a clear plan that one way is better than the other. So I think the game should be applauded, at least right now, for making it quite hard, because I think all routes are possible. I think all routes are genuine options, and ultimately we're going to have to take a stance on something. What's that going to be? So let's look at my initial thought process to start. And before I try to pick a team, I sort of ask myself these questions really in the game. A normal, I'll use the word loosely, rule that I have in FPL going into game week 1 is to try and cover as many price points as possible, because at the start, you know, there's going to be a lot of proactive managers making transfers, quite a lot of opportunity for price changes, either up or down. And the more price points you have covered, the more flexibility you give yourself in terms of moving sideways to other players and having fewer players unobtainable, should we say. So, yeah, I like to cover price points early on, pick the player I think is best at each price point. I have a little document on my computer with all the price points of players, and particularly those price points where there's quite a lot of options. I have like 2 or 3 names and I try and rank them, usually based on fixtures at the start, a little bit around reliability, around security, because I think that's quite important. We've seen in the past with other players like Nkunku that he might be the best player at that price point, but there's also risk attached. Do I want to be involved in that risk early on? Or would I rather pick someone who's maybe not quite got the same ceiling, but is a bit more reliable and isn't going to give me potential problem early on? So I try and take that into account. If I go down a certain team structure route, how does that limit me in terms of covering price points? How many players am I taking out the game? For example, if I go with Haaland and Salah, and we'll get onto this in a draft that I'll share shortly, that there's quite a lot of price points that I can't get to. Should a player or a group of players become real options at those price points, how am I going to deal with that? Is that a problem I can solve? So there's that to bear in mind. Another thing I look at the start is which players am I quite clear in my head I don't want to start with, but I call them sort of information players. So someone like Gyökeres at Arsenal is a good example of this. I'm pretty clear right now I don't want to start with him. My mindset is that I don't think he starts game week 1, and therefore he's a problem in game week 2 potentially. If you own him, you'll probably even consider him a captain in game week 2 against Leeds. But will you get cold feet? Will you get twitchy if you see Arsenal's team in game week 1 and he's not starting? Might say my feeling is right now Havertz plays game week 1 as Arsenal's striker. I don't doubt Gyökeres will get good minutes. Maybe he might even start game week 2. There might be a genuine rotation between Havertz and Gyökeres. But the information I have right now, I don't know where I stand with him. I'm not prepared to take the risk of picking him for game week 1 when I say my feeling is right now he'll be on the bench and he'll probably come on, get a cameo, Obviously, a short period on the pitch might be 1-pointer. But he is someone that could start really well. Maybe he does start game week 1, and I wouldn't put people off for thinking he will. But maybe he does start game week 1. If he starts game week 1 and scores a hat-trick, then obviously that fixture in game week 2 against Leeds is going to be prime captaincy material. So I don't want him, but I want easy access to him with the right information. So do I want to start, as an example, Ollie Watkins at 9 million, who's got a better fixture in game week 1, is more secure in terms of starting, and a good pre-season for Villa. If I start with Watkins at home to Newcastle, then if Gyökeres does go mad in game week 1 and he looks like a must-own, then there's a sideways move there. If I don't cover that price point, I've got myself a problem straight away in game week 2 that, let's say I start with Salah and my most expensive striker is 7.5 million. And I've seen teams that have that set up, and that's fine. If Gyökeres is genuinely someone that's needed in game week 2, you've got to find 1.5 million from somewhere. You might even end up taking a hit. Do I want to be in that position? So I have a list of players at the moment that I'm quite keen. I don't want to start with. They're either new to the league in most cases. They might be playing under a new manager. The team might just be a bit unknown. Someone like Man United right now, where do I stand with Mbeumo? I think he'll be a good pick. I think he's a good asset for Man United. But right now, would he play as a 10 in a 3-4-2-1? Would he play as some form of striker? I don't think he'll play wing back, but you can't completely rule it out. And Man United are just a team at the moment that, based on how they played last year, I don't really have a lot of trust in them. But I'm fully accepting that a couple of new transfers and a couple of new players into the system could really propel them forwards. I'm not considering they have Arsenal as well game week 1, who I think historically have been the best defence. I don't really want a Man United attacker in game week 1. But again, with the right information, I might want to correct that quite quickly. They've obviously got Burnley at home in game week 3. I might need to correct as early as that. So things like that. I've got a short list of sort of players and teams that I need more information on. But I'm aware those players might become interesting and necessary quite early. How do I get to them should that happen? Number 3 for my sort of questions I'm asking myself is, I've put them in inverted commas here, which risky picks am I prepared to start with? So last year it was Diego Jota in game week 1 that I didn't feel like his minutes was secure at Liverpool, but circumstance kind of made me feel like he was pretty much guaranteed to start game week 1. I think Darwin was injured at the time. Gakpo had an issue as well. So Liverpool had a really good fixture at home to Ipswich in game week 1. I kind of was fairly clear Jota was quite a cheap midfielder who was likely to play as a number 9 in that game. I wanted him. But I was also fully aware that quite soon after that, his minutes would become more risky. I need an exit plan from that. I think I'm prepared right now, particularly because of the changes that have been made in the game around rolling transfers last year, about the AFCON. You get your transfers, 5 transfers back, the extra chips and all this sort of thing. I think there is sort of a mindset for me right now that I need to play more aggressively at the start, be more attacking, take more risks, because I think plenty of managers will take risks, and obviously some will get rewarded for that, some won't. So there's clearly a collection of what I would call risky picks that could really start well. Daniel Marlon, Aston Villa, as a 5.5 mid is one example. I think he will start game week 1. He's had a really good pre-season. He'll be one of our biggest goal threats. Equally, he might not get 60 minutes in game week 1. There's other players like Leon Bailey that could play in that role. He could be someone that you pick and quite quickly becomes an issue. Maybe only starts one of the first 3. Maybe only gets like 100 minutes combined in the first 3, in which case you'll think, why did I pick him? Gyökeres, another one. I mentioned him. I don't want to start with him. Others might be prepared to take that risk. So I'm trying to work out in my head right now how many, as a volume of risky picks, am I prepared to start with, knowing that they all might need dealing with quite quickly. And then a priority order in terms of those risky picks. Which risky pick am I most confident in terms of their minutes or their output? And having a plan in mind, then if that backfires and I need a sudden sale of that player, like people found last year with Barco, Quansah and Nkunku, if you started with all 3 of those last year, you had 3 big problems already going into game week 2. I don't really want to take 3 risks. I don't want, that's like worst case, but I don't really want that problem. Do I take 1 risk? Do I take 2 risks? The risks and the players I'm considering, how quickly might they need dealing with? So thinking about those things. And finally, sort of my eighth attacker, how much do I want to spend on them? I think I'm finding this quite hard this year because in the past, I think we've had a striker in the ballpark of 5.5 million. So João Pedro, Raul Jimenez, Evan Nilsson, all around that last year. And other years we've had other examples, Jamie Vardy, memorably. That there's these cheap strikers that you're happy to have as your 7th/8th attacker, and maybe you can, if you can find the rotating pair with the budget midfielder and the budget striker to occupy your 7th starter plus your first bench, that's really good. Obviously, the sale of Mark Giu, or the loan of Mark Giu to Chelsea to Sunderland, has maybe got some managers sort of quite keen to pick him as their budget striker. For me at the moment, I'm not seeing a striker kind of realistically below 6.5 million who I've got any interest in owning. And even the 6.5 million ones are the guys like Strand Larsen and Welbeck. I'm not overly keen to own either. So to me at the moment, I'm kind of fixing myself in playing a permanent front three every week because all my strikers are going to cost more than 6.5 million, most likely. That basically means that my cheapest midfielder almost becomes a permanent 8th attacker. Now, you can obviously bench 7.5 million strikers, and you shouldn't have that price snobbery that because you pay a certain amount for a player, they instantly have to start. But equally, it's harder to bench these more premium strikers and more premium midfielders. So I think it's going to be, the way it's looking right now, I think it's going to be a slightly different strategy for me because I don't want to pick a Mayenda or an Isidore or someone like that at 5.5 million. You, again, as a viewer to this, may think differently. There's a striker at that price point you're happy with. There isn't for me. So my 8th attacker is going to be basically a permanent mid. What I would like to have done is pick someone like Jorginho Rutter, who I think is quite a good option as a 6 million mid. I'd really like to have rotated him with a 5.5 or even a 5 million striker. Even if I played Rutter 3 times out of 4, that striker could cover odd weeks. And so that's normally how I've done it. I've had rotating cheap mid at 6 million, rotating cheap striker 5.5. Last year I had Morgan Rogers at 5 million with João Pedro at 5.5. Again, each year is different. I don't think that's as obvious this year. So how much do I want to spend on this, say loosely what I'm calling permanent 8th attacker? Is it going to be 5.5 million? Or do I then have an Elliot Anderson type person in there? And I come down to 5 million and find someone at that price point, like a Baleba or an Enzo Lefebvre at Sunderland or someone like that, and just have them basically first sub on my bench every week and know that they're only going to be bought in really extreme circumstances. Maybe if they've got a really plum fixture, I might want to consider picking them. But really, I'm picking them as sort of a set and forget 8th attacker. How much do I want to spend on that spot? Because if I spend 5 or 5.5, that extra 0.5 could be valuable somewhere else. So that's the other thing I was considering. Let's look at some drafts and see where we've got to. So to say, don't fixate on the players here so much. It's more price point coverage. So up first, we've got the Salah and the Haaland draft. And it is possible to have a fairly reasonable team here with both in. The immediate downside for me is the defence, because to accommodate both Salah and Haaland, I think you have to have basically a collection of 4.5 million defenders. That's quite a lot of defenders in the game that are now out of reach in terms of affordability. Now, obviously, there are other solutions to get one premium defender in. For example, you could downgrade Morgan Rogers to another 5.5 mid, like Elliot Anderson, and upgrade one of your defenders to Kukureya or Frimpong, whoever it's going to be. But I think in reality, you're accepting you're having a budget defence here by going Haaland and Salah. Am I happy that I can find 4/5, 4.5, 4 million defenders that rotate well, that I'm happy to pick every week? So in this example, I've got Wan-Bissaka, who's could be a West Ham have played wing backs a couple of times lately. So is he going to be a right wing back this year? That could be decent for him. You've got Guehi and as a quite stable 4.5 million centre back. Not too bad for the DEFCON top up as well. Agbadou plays every game, a bit similar to Guehi, that you could just play him as a set and forget defender. You've got Matt Cash, who I think's been a bit underlooked as a Villa option. Villa don't have lots of depth at right back. I think the young guy Garcia will mainly get his appearances in Europa League. So I think Cash will probably play 7, 8 of the first 10 as I won't call him an attacking fullback, but with attacking capabilities, can put crosses in. That defence might work. You might be able to pick 3 of those every week from those 4 and be quite content with that, and still allow you to spend in other places. So you've got Salah and Palmer here. You don't have anyone in that 8 to 9 million price point in Waymo, Verts, even Gakpo, even someone like you say, out to Bruno Fernandes and Waymo. So there's a lot of midfielders there that you might struggle to get to. You have got Rodgers at 7 million in this draft that you could fiddle away to get to someone a bit more expensive. You've got a 6.5 price point covered with Ismail Assar, and you are probably relying on starting your 5.5 mid every week. So I'll put Marlon in now because he could be a really high upside one. You might just want to play it safer with Elliot Anderson, who's the expectation is going to be quite good for DEFCON points. So maybe if you get 3-4 points from him every week in that slot, you may see that as acceptable to accommodate Haaland and Salah. So I don't necessarily hate this. And up front, you've still got Haaland with one reasonable striker every nil. So I say you could come down to a Strand Larson or someone like that for Welbeck for this spot. And you've got Mark Giu in there as the 8th attacker, who might get you some minutes if you need it. So there is a lot of compromise in this draft, but that's what you would expect when you're trying to own the 2 premium players in the game. But that's where you've got to sort of come to terms with: are you happy to have an 8th attacker who I think right now we think is unlikely to get many minutes, but you wouldn't have necessarily gone on loan to Sunderland if he was going to be completely frozen out. So there must be an expectation he'll play some minutes. Certainly more minutes he would have got at Chelsea, but does that mean regular starts, or is that regular 20-minute cameos? Maybe that's not bad for an 8th attacker at 4.5 million. Are you happy having 5.5 sort of play-in player in midfield often? Are you happy going super cheap in defence? Do you think that there's enough upside there? So questions to ask yourself, but it is possible to make this draft. But immediately my concerns are: what happens if Florian Wirtz starts very well? How are you affording him? Rodgers is at 1.5 cheaper. Are you prepared to sacrifice Cole Palmer if the situation allows? If one or two of these expensive defenders start really well, Munoz even might mean someone at 5 million, how do you get to them? Are you just starting with Haaland and Salah for safety and you're sort of expecting to downgrade one fairly soon? Questions to ask yourself, but they're just, to me, there's too much being given up here to have this team. So I don't think I'm going to start with Haaland and Salah, both of them, because there's too many players that I can't get to that I might need a solution for. I've got potentially a dead 8th attacker. I've potentially got a load of defenders that I can't get to. I'm sure one or two of them will start well and be genuine options. How do I get to Watkins or Gyökeres? That's really tricky. And those midfielders, particularly, I've got concerns like how well will Florian Wirtz or Mbeumo start? If one of those does really well early on, how do I get to them? You can have plans in place, plan Bs, plan Cs, but you could end up with 3 or 4 people here. Let's just say you want Gyökeres, you want Wirtz, and you want Aït-Nouri. You need to try and get to all 3 of them, even if you sacrifice Salah or Haaland. It's going to take quite a lot of transfers to correct the other positions. Do I want that? Do I think the upside of Salah and Haaland is enough in game week 1 to potentially have to deal with all of that risk in the game weeks that come straight after? Not for me. So I won't start with this, but obviously if people want to and are aware of the risk, then fair play. We jump on to the Salah only draft here, and again, it's not bad. I've just put Keller and Valdemarson in goal in most of these drafts because he's likely to be numbers 1 and 2 from the same team. So you're guaranteeing a playing goalkeeper for 8.5 million. And that's probably one of the main sacrifices by having one or both of these 2 premiums, that you have to probably accept that you're not going to have rotating 4.5 keepers or a Sanchez or a Raya in goal or something like that. So they're in place again. Defense is fairly good. We've got a 6 million upside defender in. I put Cucurella in as the example here. Could be anyone else. And we've got a 5.5 million defender in who may do well for DEFCON. Maybe quite a nice set and forget option. So the expectation is, I think the Everton guys could work here for this role. The Forest guys could work quite well for this role. So having that price point covered, I think, is nice. And then we've got 2 fairly steady 4.5 million defenders. We play one of those each week. So I think that's not bad. You play your high upside defender, you play your steady 5.5 defender, or Munoz if you prefer him in the 5.5 spot with a bit more attacking capability. And you've got rotating 4.5s now. So I've put 2 safe and steady ones in. You may want to put 2 high upside ones in instead and rotate them if you can find rotation with the Kuiper, Truffert, Cash, Wan-Bissaka, these sort of guys. So that's not bad. Kind of back three each week that kind of works. In midfield, you've got 4 decent price points. You've got Salah there, you've got Palmer there, Rodgers and Kudus. In this case, Kudus being a 6.5 million. Again, not an easy route to get to the Bruno Fernandes Wirtz price point, but that's the sacrifice here. And up front, you've got a fairly good front three. You've got the Watkins price point covered in case Gyökeres does well. Solanke, Mateta, someone around that price point is handy. And Evan Nilsson's there as well. So you've got 3 more than playable attackers, no striker you're particularly keen to bench. So Xhaka, in this example, the 5 million mid is just the permanent 8th attacker. And he's there in case someone unexpectedly misses out. But he'll come on and get minutes and maybe some DEFCON points for 5 million if you want him. So the only real sacrifice here is that Wirtz / Bruno Fernandes price point. And you might be able to make that money available in other ways. If you were happy to upgrade Rodgers to Wirtz, for example, you need 1.5 million. You could put Evan Nilsson down to Strand Larsen. You could put Murillo down to Lacroix, 5.5 million down to a 5. You could put Guehi down to another 4, and you're there. You might not need the 6 million price point covered in defence. You might be happy to move that down to Munoz and have 2 5.5. There's ways to free up the 1.5 to cover that price point. But in terms of having general balance, I quite like this team. It's just, how do you get to that sort of 8.5, 9 million mid, the Mbeumo, the Wirtz, should it come to it? But other than that, I think it's quite nice, quite steady, and covers a lot of things. Then we move on to the Haaland draft and No Salah. So defense is largely the same, apart from I've covered all of the defender price brackets here. So we've got a 6.5. We've got a 6. We've got a 5.5, a 5, a 4.5, and a 4. So that's really nice that any defender is now obtainable if they start well. In midfield, Wirtz is in there in this example. So without Salah, he's the only midfielder here that's kind of out of reach. Palmer's there if Saka takes off. Wirtz can probably be manipulated into a Bruno or to an Mbeumo if I need one of those two. Rodgers is there in that middle price point. Kudus a little bit cheaper, and then say Xhaka still there for 5 million as the 8th attacker. Haaland is then up front with Solanke and Evan Nilsson. So I'm missing here the Watkins price point. So the Salah team allows me everyone apart from the Wirtz Bruno price point. This Haaland draft stops me again from having Watkins. Now again, there's options. Solanke could become Watkins here. I need to find 1.5 million. I could just move Lacroix down from Murillo down to another 4.5. That frees up 1 million. Maybe there's another way to free up 0.5. Maybe it's Evan Nilsson down. So I could end up with Haaland, Watkins, and Strand Larsen as my front three. And by moving Murillo down to another 4.5, I'm there, and I can afford Watkins in that way. So there's obviously ways to manipulate the budget and caress the budget within each structure. But I like this defence to cover price points. I quite like the midfield structure and balance of this, covering price points. But it's the striker that's the problem. So that's my sacrifice here. You may be able to manipulate it. That's not a problem for you if you went with a draft along these lines. And then finally, it's obviously Salah and Haaland together. And basically, it's a free-for-all now. Everything's possible. So we've got a more expensive keeper. I think this draft on the screen right now has got 1.5 million in the bank as well. That's obviously quite handy if you wanted to upgrade 1 or 2 players, or if you just want to leave money in the bank to deal with things as and when. Maybe 1.5 million is too much for that sort of situation. But I never think it's a bad idea having sort of 0.5, 1 million in the bank in game week 1, that you're not forced into sort of snap decisions. Say you've got a 5 million defender you quite like. There's another 5 million defender who's likely to go up in price. Everyone's going there. If you've got 0.5 in the bank, you can upgrade your 4.5 million defender to get him, rather than having to think, right now, if I don't make this move tonight, this player I want is going to be 5.1. I now can't afford him for my 5 million defender because of that. Because every price change early on is 0.5, isn't it? It's 0.1 change, but to deal with it, you need 0.5 in the bank. You can't keep 0.1 in the bank at the start. So having 0.5 in the bank sometimes is quite helpful at the thing to not have to rush into decisions. So this draft would allow some money in the bank. I think we've got a more expensive goalkeeper in place to start with, more choice amongst the 5 million guys. Defence, again, no let up in terms of free premiums. This example's got Van Dijk at 6 and 2 5.5, Murillo and Munoz. You could have 3 6 millions in here and it would be not a problem to hold you back anywhere else. So if you want more premium, more high upside defence, it's possible here. In midfield, say there's no Salah, but we've got Palmer, we've got Bruno, we've got Wirtz and Rodgers. Loads of flexibility and options within this structure. And Haaland again there as the more expensive, shall we say, 8th attacker. You don't having to go down to the Xhaka or someone like that. You can pay 5.5 for that stable 8th attacker. And up front, we have the Watkins price point covered. We still have Solanke and Evan-Nilsson. You could even start Watkins and Gyökeres quite comfortably. And here, just move Solanke straight to Gyökeres. You can have both. And if you want to upgrade Evan-Nilsson, you can. If you want Isak, there's obviously ways to manipulate that as well. So basically, no Salah and no Haaland. You might be giving up that security of captain. That I think most people will look to those two premiums as logical captaincy options every week. But if you're happy to captain someone else in each game week, say, for example, in game week 1, people might be happy to captain Cole Palmer against Palace. In game week 2, you can have an Arsenal player against Leeds. In game week 3, you can have Bruno Fernandes against Burnley. If you're happy with those sorts of decisions, you might not need Haaland and Salah. And then you're just giving yourself the maximum in terms of flexibility and options. So, yeah, I don't hate this plan either. This was my thought when the game launched. I'd be on this strategy. My one concern, I haven't written it in the thoughts box here, but my one concern is, I say, it's all right having this sort of net of what we call tier 2 players in terms of budget, the Wirtz, the Bruno, the Watkins. But do we genuinely see enough upside from them? So, say last year, I went without Haaland, but it allowed me Isak for good games. It allowed me other Liverpool players. I think so. I had Salah still because he was a lot cheaper. I had Diego Jota. I had premium defenders. My balance was good with high upside players. Am I in this draft just spending money for the sake of it? Because I can. I'll have Bruno, Wirtz and Palmer. Because I can. I'll have Watkins and Gyökeres. So no issue. It's a lot of price in terms tier 2 players. And there's still an expectation they'll do quite well. Hence why they've been priced the way they have. But you are almost spending money for the sake of it here. Do you genuinely see enough upside? That's my question to myself. I may end up on this strategy. At the moment, I've got Haaland. My draft, I haven't shared my actual draft because it's kind of irrelevant this far away from game week 1. But at the moment, I'm hedging more towards the own Haaland draft because I still quite like the balance of my team and while still affording him. But this would be my plan B approach right now, I think, is to go with this. But I just question whether, because I have basically almost an unlimited pot of money because I don't have Salah or Haaland, am I spending that well or am I spending that because I can? Just something to sort of ask yourself there. So on to some takeaways now for best team structure. As I just sort of highlighted just briefly at the end there, if you go with neither Salah or Haaland, you're basically in a position where money is no option for anything. You can have whoever you want. And that might be quite nice in terms of that flexibility. Whereas if you want Salah or Haaland, I think it's quite hard not to sacrifice something. Now, can you sort of make peace with yourself that the sacrifice you're making is a good one? I've highlighted 3 examples here that if you own Salah or Haaland, you're probably sacrificing at least one of the following 3. Are you happy to have a cheaper defence? Probably having regular starting defenders at 4.5, where if you don't have either, you can have 3 premium defenders. There are obviously ways you can still manipulate a team not to have starting 4.5. So I think my Haaland draft had a 6, a 5.5 and a 5. So it is possible, but the sacrifice would then come somewhere else. So are you prepared to play 1, maybe even 2, 4.5 defenders every week? If you are, that's all well and good. That would probably be your only sacrifice. Those midfielders between 8 and 9 million, I think Mbeumo, Wirtz and Bruno Fernandes are the 3 main ones right now. Are you keen to cover that price point? Do you want the option of getting to someone in that bracket? If you're not, because you're happy you don't want those 3 players, all well and good. You can have your more expensive defenders, your second sort of 9 million striker. But if you want that price point covered, something else has to give. And I say the third option is this 9 million striker. Do you want the option of Watkins, Gyökeres and Isak? Particularly Watkins or Gyökeres. If you're happy to let that go, or at least wait a handful of weeks before addressing it, then that can be your sacrifice and you can have your 9 million mid and you can have your slightly more expensive defence. If you want the option of Gyökeres because you're worried that he might get a hat-trick in game week 1, then what do you sacrifice? The mid or the defenders? So that's where I've got to. I'm not going to tell you to pick a specific team structure in this video. That's not the point. You need to make your own decisions about what you're willing to give up, what you're desperate to have. But just sort of my thoughts around each structure, what I'm looking to do in my team, what the sort of questions I ask myself, and what I'm analysing when I look through each layout. And again, in my case, what am I most happy to sacrifice? Is it the premium attacker altogether, in which case I'll have the neither team and I can have everything else I want? Am I happy to play 4.5 million rotating defenders every week, and then that should be enough to still own Salah or Haaland? Do I need that 9 million price point covered? How do I really feel about Gyökeres? Do I see him as that much of a necessity early on that I want the option to get to him if he starts well? Again, everyone's got different thoughts on that. So that's the end of this video. Just for those that are new here, I've got an FPL mini league. The code is lowercase g, lowercase o, 6, lowercase f, lowercase u, number 5. That's on the screen right now. Appreciate any comments you have around what structure you're going for, which sort of content you like to see between now and the start of the season. I'll plan to do 3 or 4 more pods quite comfortably between now and Gameweek 1 launching. I'll have a look at some tactical stuff, what I'm noticing from pre-season, how that's affecting my sort of decision making and my thinking. That'll probably be the next pod I do. But until next time, yeah, thanks for listening, and I'll see you all soon.